Stranger Things isn't a show about monsters, secret labs, or alternate dimensions. It's a show about how people respond when the world around them starts falling apart, and who notices first when something is wrong. And when you really pay attention, one thing becomes clear. The adults who survive and the adults who keep their kids alive aren't the loudest ones. They're the ones who actually listen, which brings me to Karen Wheeler. Karen isn't written as a traditional hero. She doesn't fight monsters directly, she isn't involved in government cover ups, and she's rarely positioned at the center of the plot. But she is the reason the Wheeler household survives Hawkins as long as it does. And the fact that she's so easy to overlook is exactly why she matters. One of the easiest ways to understand Karen's role in the story is by looking at how her household functions. Ted Wheeler isn't necessarily written as malicious or cruel. He's written as disengaged. He's often distracted, reactive rather than proactive, and largely unaware of what his kids are doing until someone brings it to his attention. Karen, on the other hand, is the default parent. She knows where her kids are, she knows what they're dealing with emotionally, and she's usually the first adult to notice when something feels off. This difference isn't exaggerated for comedy, it's part of a larger pattern in the show, where fathers tend to fade into the background while mothers shoulder the emotional responsibility of keeping the family functioning. Karen's role isn't dramatic, but it's constant, and that constancy is what makes her important. Karen's marriage is portrayed as stable, but emotionally unfulfilling. There's no major conflict, no explosive arguments, just distance. And the show makes it clear that Karen feels that absence. This is where the Billy storyline is often misunderstood. Karen's attraction to Billy isn't framed as a desire for romance or escape in a long term sense. It's framed as a response to emotional stagnation, and the show communicates this very deliberately through the books Karen reads. In season 2, Karen is shown reading Heart of Thunder by Joanna Lindsey, a classic romance fantasy. The cover features a shirtless man and a woman that are locked in an intense embrace. But the Duffer Brothers later confirmed that the cover was intentionally altered to resemble Billy. In other words, Karen's fantasy is given a face. The story itself centers on a woman trapped by expectation, whose life is disrupted by a man who represents passion rather than stability. And that's exactly the role Billy plays in Karen's storyline. Later in season 3, Karen is seen reading Tender is the Storm, another Joanna Lindsey novel about a woman resisting a life that's been chosen for her. These books aren't random details, they reflect Karen's internal state, her longing to feel desired, seen, and alive. What's important, though, is that this longing never overrides her priorities. Karen doesn't abandon her family, and she doesn't choose Billy. She also doesn't resent her children for the life she didn't end up having, and that distinction matters. Karen is a character who understands loss quietly. She understands that her life didn't unfold the way she might have imagined, but she doesn't project that disappointment onto her kids. Instead, she becomes more attentive to them. This is evident as early as season 1, when Will Byers disappears. Karen immediately tightens boundaries. She doesn't let the kids roam freely, and she limits where they can go and who they can see. From a teenage perspective, that looks controlling, but from a parental perspective, it's a rational response to danger. Karen's instinct is always to reduce risk, even when it makes her unpopular. One of Karen's most defining moments comes in the scene with Holly. Holly bursts into the bathroom, scared, talking about something that she's seen. At first, Karen dismisses it. which is a realistic reaction in a world where monsters aren't supposed to exist. But what makes Karen different is how quickly she adapts. The moment she realizes that something is truly wrong, she doesn't argue. She doesn't rationalize it away. She shifts into protection mode immediately. She hides with Holly, she shields her, and she reacts instinctively. This scene highlights one of Karen's most important traits. She's willing to admit when she's wronged and change her response in real time. That ability to listen, reassess, and act is what ultimately keeps her children safe. Karen's behavior fits into a broader pattern within Stranger Things. Fathers are often portrayed as passive or distant, while mothers are vigilant and emotionally attuned to their children's needs. Joyce Byers is a more extreme example of this same instinct. Joyce's intensity is frequently dismissed by others, but she's almost always right. Her fear doesn't come from irrationality, it comes from experience. There's a scene where Joyce confronts Robin for taking Will and cutting off communication. Joyce's anger isn't about control, it's about fear. She's already lost her son once, and Will, sitting near, absorbs that fear quietly. Joyce represents what happens when maternal intuition is repeatedly ignored until it becomes impossible to dismiss. Karen represents that same instinct in a more contained environment. Karen's influence is especially clear in her relationship with Nancy. Karen doesn't see herself as being particularly strong, but Nancy does. When Nancy tells her, "I get it from you," it reframes Karen's role entirely. Karen encourages Nancy to stand up for herself, to finish what she starts, and to trust her own instincts. In many ways, Karen gives Nancy the permission she never gave herself. Karen Wheeler isn't written to be impressive, she's written to be believable. Her strength doesn't come from power or authority. It comes from attention, from her willingness to listen, reassess, and change her response when the situation calls for it. In a town where most adults dismiss fear until it's too late, Karen is one of the few who treats it as information instead of inconvenience. And that's why she survives. Karen doesn't fight the Upside Down directly, but she does something just as important. She believes her children when they're scared. And in Stranger Things, that difference isn't symbolic. It's the reason the story doesn't end sooner.